In the fog-choked streets of 1894 London, Dr. John Watson mourns his friend Sherlock Holmes, believed dead after a deadly clash with the criminal mastermind Moriarty. But when a shadowy figure sparks hope, Watson discovers Holmes is alive, hunting. A new foe colonel, Sebastian Moran, a ruthless killer wielding a silent egg. From a derelict house opposite 2-1B to the silent halls of the Diogenes Club, they unravel a conspiracy of murder and betrayal tied to the mysterious death of Ronald Adair and a hidden mastermind pulling the strings. Will Holmes and Watson outwit this deadly web before it claims them? The game is afoot. Chapter 1. The Return of Sherlock Holmes. It was in the spring of 1894, a season of renewal that seemed to mock the heavy grief I had carried for nigh on 3 years. The world, or at least that portion of it which knew the name Sherlock Holmes, believed him dead, lost in the churning abyss of the Reichenbach Falls, where he had grappled with the sinister Professor Moriarty. I, Dr. John Watson, his chronicler and friend, had accepted this bitter truth, though it left a void no practice of medicine could fill. My days were spent in the quiet routine of my Harley Street surgery, yet my nights were haunted by memories of our adventures, the flicker of gaslight on Baker Street, the scrape of Holmes's violin, the sudden spark in his eyes when a case seized his restless mind. London, vast and indifferent, moved on without him, and I, too, endeavored to move forward, though my heart rebelled against it. On an April evening, as the fog rolled thick through Park Lane, I found myself walking home. From a patient's bedside, my thoughts adrift. The air was damp, the gas lamps casting feeble halos in the mist, and the clatter of hansoms and the cries of newsboys were muffled, as if the city held its breath. I had reached the corner of Vere Street when a tall figure, cloaked and hatless, brushed past me with a stride so purposeful it arrested my attention. His face was obscured by a high collar, but there was something in the angular set of his shoulders, the quick, almost predatory turn of his head, that struck a chord deep within me. It was a fleeting impression, yet it set my pulse racing. I stood rooted, staring after him as he melted into the fog, his footsteps sharp against the cobblestones before they faded into silence. Holmes, I whispered to myself, the name escaping before I could check it. The notion was absurd madness, born of longing, yet I could not shake the conviction that I had seen him, or some shadow of him, moving through the London dusk. I turned back, hastening toward the alley where he had vanished, but found only empty pavement and the faint drip of water from an unseen gutter. My breath came short, not from exertion, but from the sudden, wild hope that surged within me. I resolved then to seek answers, though I knew not where to begin or what I hoped to find. The following morning, I sat in my consulting room, my mind still tangled with the previous night's encounter. The room was warm, the fire crackling softly, and my appointments were few, allowing my thoughts to wander. I was turning over the pages of a medical journal, seeing little of the text, when my housekeeper announced a visitor, Mr. Grayson, a bookseller, seeking advice for a trifling ailment. I bade her show him in, expecting a routine consultation. But when the door opened, I found myself staring at a man whose presence set my nerves on edge. He was tall, with a stoop that suggested a scholar's life, and his face was half hidden by a pair of thick spectacles. His hair was grey, his beard neatly trimmed, and his voice carried a slight quiver, as if he were perpetually anxious. He introduced himself as a dealer in rare volumes, newly arrived in London to establish a shop in Bloomsbury. His complaint was vague nervous condition, he said, brought on by overwork. As he spoke, I observed him closely, noting the long fingers that fidgeted with a silver pencil, the sharp glance that darted from beneath his spectacles, and the peculiar tilt of his head when he paused, as if listening for something beyond the room. His conversation turned to books, and he spoke with enthusiasm of a first edition of Donne's poems he had recently acquired. Yet there was something rehearsed in his manner, a performance that did not quite ring true. He mentioned, almost casually, that he had passed by Baker Street the previous day and noticed an empty house opposite the old lodgings I had shared with Holmes. "A curious place," said he, "all boarded up, yet it seemed to me someone had been there recently. A shadow moved in the window, or so I thought." The mention of Baker Street pierced me like a blade. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the arms of my chair. "What do you mean, a shadow?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He blinked, as if startled by my intensity. "Oh, nothing certain, Doctor. The fog plays tricks, does it not? I only thought it odd, an empty house with such a presence." I studied him, my suspicion growing, the tilt of his head, the cadence of his speech, the way his fingers traced the edge of his pencil. These were not the habits of a stranger. My heart thudded, and I could bear it no longer. I rose, crossed the room, and seized his arm. "Holmes," I cried, "you cannot deceive me. It is you." For a moment, he froze, his eyes wide behind the spectacles. Then, with a low chuckle, he removed them, revealing the hawk-like features I knew so well. The beard was false, the grey hair a wig, but the man before me was unmistakably Sherlock Holmes, alive and whole, his keen grey eyes gleaming with a mixture of amusement and contrition. "My dear Watson," said he, grasping my hand, "I owe you 1,000 apologies. I had hoped to test your powers of observation, but I see I underestimated your heart." I staggered back, my legs weak, and sank into my chair. The room seemed to spin, and for a moment I could neither speak nor think. Holmes, alive. The joy was tempered by a sharp pang of betrayal, for he had let me mourn him these 3 years. Yet his presence, so vital, so undeniably real, banished all but the need to understand. "Holmes," I managed at last, "why did you not tell me?" He drew a chair close to mine, his expression growing grave. "Forgive me, Watson. It was not cruelty, but necessity. Sit, and I will explain all." Over brandy, which I poured with trembling hands, Holmes recounted the tale of his survival. The Reichenbach Falls, he said, had been the stage for a desperate struggle. Moriarty, with his diabolical cunning, had nearly bested him, but Holmes's knowledge of Baritsu, a Japanese system of wrestling, had given him the edge. As they grappled on the precipice, he had thrown Moriarty into the abyss, but not before a desperate lunge had nearly taken them both. Clinging to a narrow ledge, Holmes had waited until Moriarty's allies departed, then scaled the cliff to safety. Knowing his enemies would hunt him, he had fled to the continent, adopting disguises and moving from city to city, Florence, Lhasa, Khartoum, tracking the remnants of Moriarty's criminal empire. "I could not return," said he, "until I was certain the danger was past. Moriarty's lieutenants were many, and their reach long. To reveal myself, even to you, would have put you in their sights." "But why now?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "Why return at all, if the risk remains?" Holmes leaned forward, his eyes alight with that fierce intensity I knew so well. "Because one remains, Watson, the most dangerous of them. Alcanel, Sebastian Moran, Moriarty's right hand. He is in London, and he seeks my life. I have tracked him here, and I mean to end his game." I stared at him, the weight of his words settling over me. Colonel Moran, a name I had heard only in whispers, a man said to be as cunning as Moriarty and twice as ruthless. A big game hunter turned assassin. His skill with a rifle was matched only by his cold-blooded ambition. The thought of such a foe lurking in the shadows of London sent a chill through me. Holmes rose, pacing the room with that restless energy that signaled a mind at work. "Moran is no ordinary criminal," said he. "He is a man of precision, a hunter who strikes from afar. I have reason to believe he watches Baker Street, waiting for a chance to finish what Moriarty began." "The empty house," I said, recalling his earlier words. "You think he uses it as a vantage point?" "Precisely," said Holmes, a faint smile touching his lips. "You have not lost your knack, Watson. The house opposite 2-1B is derelict, yet it offers a clear line of sight to our old rooms. I have observed signs of recent entry, broken boards, fresh footprints in the dust. Moran, I am certain, has been there." I felt a surge of the old excitement, the thrill of the chase that had defined our years together. Yet it was tempered by fear, not for myself, but for Holmes, who had already cheated death once. "What is your plan?" I asked. Holmes stopped pacing and fixed me with a steady gaze. "A trap, Watson. We shall lure Moran into the open, where he cannot hide, but I cannot do it alone. Will you stand with me, as you have so often before?" The question was unnecessary. My loyalty to Holmes was as fixed as the stars, and though I dreaded the danger, I could no more refuse him than I could turn back time. "Of course," I said. "What must I do?" He clapped a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. "For now, keep my return a secret. Tell no one, not even Mrs. Hudson. Tomorrow night, we shall visit the empty house and set our plan in motion. Bring your revolver. Watson, it may be needed." As he spoke, I saw again the man I had known, the relentless intellect, the unyielding courage, the friend who had shaped my life more than any other. Yet there was a new weight in his manner, a shadow of the years spent in exile. He had faced death and emerged, but not unchanged. Holmes donned his disguise once more, preparing to leave. "I am staying at a lodging in Camden," said he. "Too many eyes watch Baker Street. Send word if you hear anything unusual, but do not seek me out. We must move carefully, Watson." With that, he was gone, slipping into the morning as silently as he had come. I sat alone, the brandy untouched, my mind a whirl of emotions, joy at his return, anger at his deception, and a growing dread of the enemy we faced. Colonel Moran, a hunter of men, was out there, and I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that the game was afoot. The day passed in a haze. My patients received my attention, but my thoughts were elsewhere, replaying Holmes's words. The image of that cloaked figure in the fog, the mention of the empty house. By evening, I could bear the confinement no longer. I took a hansom to Baker Street, not to 2-1B, but to the alley opposite, where the derelict house stood. It was a grim structure, its windows boarded, its brickwork crumbling under years of neglect. I lingered only a moment, wary of being seen, but noted a faint scuff in the dirt near the door, a mark that could have been a footprint. I returned home. My resolve hardened. Holmes was alive, and together we would face this new peril. Yet as I lay in bed that night, the fog pressing against my windows, I could not shake the sense that we were already being watched, that somewhere in the vast, shadowed city, Colonel Moran was waiting, his finger on the trigger. The hours until our rendezvous stretched endlessly before me, each one heavy with anticipation. I checked my revolver, its weight reassuring in my hand, and thought of the years without Holmes' years, of routine, of loss, of a world grown dim. Now he was back, and with him came the promise of danger, of purpose, of life. Whatever lay ahead, I would meet it at his side, as I always had. Chapter 2. The explanation. The fire in my consulting room cast a warm glow, its crackle a soft counterpoint to the weight of the moment. Sherlock Holmes sat opposite me, his lean frame half reclined in the armchair, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin. The disguise of the bookseller had been discarded, and though his eyes gleamed with their old intensity, there was a weariness in his posture that I had not seen before. My brandy glass rested untouched on the table, for my mind was too consumed by his presence live, impossibly alive to care for drink. The shock of his return still coursed through me, mingled with a sharp sting of betrayal. 3 years I had mourned him, and yet here he sat, as if those years had been but a pause in our shared history. I waited, my heart a tumult of joy and reproach for the explanation he had promised. Holmes's gaze flickered to the fire, and when he spoke, his voice was low, measured, as if he weighed each word for its impact. "Watson," said he, "you have every right to be aggrieved. I have wounded you, and for that I am truly sorry. But you must understand, my silence was not a choice, but a necessity. The enemies I faced were not merely men, but a web of malice spun by one whose intellect rivaled my own. To reveal my survival, even to you, would have been to court disaster." I leaned forward, my hands clasped tightly. "But why, Holmes? Why let me believe you're dead? A single word, a note, surely you could have trusted me to keep your secret." Shook his head, a faint smile touching his lips, though it held no mirth. "Trust was never the issue, my dear friend. It was precisely because I trusted you that I could not burden you with the truth. Moriarty's network was vast, his agents relentless. Had they suspected I lived, they would have sought you out, used you as leverage, or worse, your grief, painful as it was to me, was your shield. It convinced them I was gone." I felt the weight of his words, the logic as unyielding as the man himself. Yet the hurt lingered, a dull ache beneath my relief. "And Moriarty?" I asked. "You are certain he is dead?" Holmes's eyes darkened, and he rose, pacing the room with that restless energy I knew so well. As certain as one can be of a serpent crushed beneath a rock. "I saw him fall, Watson, into the abyss of the Reichenbach Falls. His body was never recovered, but the chasm was deep, the waters treacherous. No man could survive such a plunge." He paused, his gaze distant, as if seeing again that terrible moment, but his shadow lingers. His organization, though fractured, did not die with him. There are those who still carry his banner, and chief among them is Colonel Sebastian Moran. The name struck me like a cold wind. I had heard it before, in fragments of conversation during our earlier cases, always spoken with a gravity that hinted at danger. "Moran," I repeated. "You mentioned him earlier. Who is he, Holmes?" He returned to his chair, leaning forward now, his voice low and urgent. "Colonel Sebastian Moran, late of Her Majesty's Indian Army, is a man of singular talents and singular vices. A crack shot, a big game hunter whose exploits in the jungles of Bengal are the stuff of legend. But his true calling was not in service to the crown. He was Moriarty's lieutenant, his enforcer, a man whose cunning is matched only by his ruthlessness. Where Moriarty was the mind, Moran was the hand, precise, deadly, and utterly without scruple. I felt a chill, though the fire burned brightly. "And you believe he is in London?" "I know he is," said Holmes, his tone flat. "I have tracked him these past months, from Calcutta to Constantinople, always one step behind. He is here, Watson, and he seeks my life. My return to London is no coincidence, it is a challenge. Moran knows I live, and he will not rest until one of us is dead." The gravity of his words settled over me, and I saw in his eyes a determination that bordered on obsession. "But how did you survive, Holmes?" I asked, returning to the question that burned within me. "The falls, the struggle, you said you escaped, but how?" He leaned back, his fingers tracing the arm of the chair as he recounted the tale. "It was a matter of seconds, Watson. Moriarty and I grappled on the narrow path above the falls, his strength surprising for a man of his build. He was a master of calculation, but I had the advantage of Baritsu, the Japanese art of wrestling I had studied in my youth. At the critical moment, I used his momentum against him, throwing him over the edge. But his final lunge nearly took me with him. I clung to a jagged outcrop, my fingers bleeding as his scream echoed into the void. He paused, his gaze distant, and I could almost see the mist rising from the falls, hear the roar of the water. I waited there, he continued, hanging by my hands, until I was certain his allies had departed. They had seen us fall, or so they thought, and did not linger to search. When night fell, I climbed the cliff, a perilous ascent that left me battered but alive. From there, I fled into the mountains, adopting the guise of a Norwegian explorer named Sigerson. For 3 years, I moved through the shadows, Florence, Tibet, Persia, Sudan, always watching, always learning, dismantling Moriarty's empire, piece by piece. I stared at him, marveling at the resilience, the sheer audacity of his survival. "And no one knew?" I asked. "Not even Mycroft?" Holmes's lips twitched in a wry smile. "Mycroft suspected, of course. My brother is not easily deceived. But even he could not know the full extent of my movements. I sent him coded messages when I could, but I kept my distance. The fewer who knew, the safer I wasn't you." The mention of Mycroft stirred a memory, but I pushed it aside, my mind still grappling with the scope of his tale. "And now," I asked, "what is your plan for Moran?" Holmes's eyes gleamed, and he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Moran is a hunter, Watson, and hunters are predictable in their habits, system. Habits they stalk. Their prey. He believes I am that prey, and he will come for me at Baker Street. The empty house across the street is his perch. I am certain of it. My plan is simple. We will draw him out, make him believe he has his chance, and catch him in the act." I nodded, my mind racing with the implications. "And my role?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tightening in my chest. "You will be my eyes, Watson," said he. "Tomorrow night, we will take our positions in the empty house. You will watch the street, your revolver at the ready. When Moran makes his move, we will have him." The plan was bold, reckless even, but it was Holmes's way turning the hunter into the hunted. I felt the old thrill stirring within me, the call of adventure that had defined our years together. Yet there was a new weight to it, a sense of stakes higher than any we had faced before. Holmes rose, his silhouette sharp against the firelight. "I must go," said he. "There are preparations to make. and I cannot be seen near Baker Street until the trap is set. Keep my secret, Watson, and be ready tomorrow night. We have a formidable foe, but together we are his equal." He clasped my hand, his grip firm, and then he was gone, slipping into the night as silently as he had come. I sat alone, the fire dying to embers, my mind a whirl of questions and resolve. Holmes was alive, and with him came danger, purpose, and the promise of a reckoning. Whatever lay ahead, I would face it at his side, as I always had. Chapter 3. The empty house. The night was heavy with the promise of rain, the air thick and cool as I made my way to Baker Street under the cloak of darkness. It was the evening following Holmes's astonishing return, and my heart beat with a mixture of exhilaration and dread. The familiar street, so often the stage for our adventures, now seemed a place of menace, its gas lamps casting long shadows that danced like spectres in the fog. I carried my service revolver in my coat pocket, its weight a grim reminder of the peril we faced. Holmes had instructed me to meet him at the corner of Marylebone Road, and as I approached, I saw his tall, lean figure emerge from the gloom, his Inverness cape blending with the night. "Watson," he whispered, his voice low but clear, "you are punctual, as ever. Come, we must move swiftly." He led me through a narrow alley, our footsteps muffled on the damp cobblestones, until we reached the rear of the derelict house opposite to 21B Baker Street. The building loomed before us, its facade crumbling, its windows bordered with splintered planks that seemed to gape like empty eyes. Holmes paused, his keen gaze scanning the shadows, then produced a small jemmy from his pocket and set to work on a side door. The lock yielded with a faint click, and we slipped inside. The air within stale and heavy with the scent of dust and decay. The interior was a labyrinth of neglect. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and cobwebs draped the corners like tattered curtains. Holmes moved with the silent grace of a cat, leading me up a rickety staircase to a room on the first floor that overlooked Baker Street. A single window, its boards loosened just enough to afford a view, framed the familiar sight of our old lodgings across the way. The curtains of 2-1B were drawn, but a faint glow seeped through, suggesting life within. Holmes motioned me to stay. Low, and we crouched beside the window, our breath shallow in the stillness. "Observe," he whispered, pointing to the street below. "The stage is set." I peered out, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. Across the street, in the window of 2-1B, stood a silhouette of figure that, to an unsuspecting eye, could only be Sherlock Holmes. The head was tilted slightly, as if in thought, and the outline of a pipe was visible, its smoke curling faintly. I stared, momentarily confounded, until Holmes's low chuckle brought me back. "A wax bust, Watson," said he, "crafted in Paris by a master artisan and shipped here at no small expense. Mrs. Hudson, under strict instructions, moves it periodically to maintain the illusion of life. The lamp is timed to flicker, suggesting movement. Moran, if he is watching, will believe me an easy target." The ingenuity of the ruse was pure Holmes, and I marveled at its audacity. Yet the thought of Colonel Sebastian Moran, a hunter of unmatched skill, lurking somewhere in the night, sent a chill through me. "Where do you think he is?" I whispered, my hand tightening on my revolver. Holmes's eyes gleamed in the dark, fixed on the street. "Close, Watson, very close. He is a patient man, but his hatred drives him. He will not resist the chance to strike." We settled into a tense vigil, the silence broken only by the distant clatter of a hansom or the occasional drip of water from a leaking roof. The minutes stretched into hours, and my limbs grew stiff from crouching, but Holmes remained motionless, his focus unyielding. I watched him, marveling anew at his endurance, his mind a steel trap set for its quarry. My own thoughts wandered, revisiting the years of his absence, the grief that had weighed upon me, and now this sudden return, thrusting us into danger once more. Yet there was nowhere I would rather be than at his side, facing the unknown. As midnight approached, a faint sound, a soft scrape, like a boot on stone, came from the street below. Holmes's hand gripped my arm, his touch electric with warning. I peered through the gap in the boards, my heart pounding. A figure emerged from the shadows across the way, tall and cloaked, moving with the deliberate grace of a predator. He carried a long, narrow case, its outline unmistakable even in the dim light. He paused, glancing up at the window of 2-1B, where the wax bust stood sentinel. "Moran," Holmes breathed, his voice barely audible. "See how he moves, Watson, every step calculated. That case holds his air gun, a weapon of his own design, silent and lethal. He will not risk a shot from the street, but there is an alley opposite. He will take his position there." I nodded, my mouth dry. The figure slipped into the alley, vanishing from view, and Holmes's grip tightened. "Patience, Watson," he murmured. "We must wait for his move." The minutes crawled by, each one taut with expectation. I kept my eyes on the alley, straining to catch any sign of movement. My revolver felt heavy in my hand, its cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of my palm. I was no stranger to danger, having faced it often at Holmes's side. But this felt differenter. Duel with a foe whose skill matched my friend's. A man who hunted not for sport, but for vengeance. Suddenly, a faint hiss broke the silence, like the release of compressed air. Across the street, the wax bust in 2-1B's window shuddered, its head tilting slightly as if struck. I gasped, but Holmes's hand steadied me. "He has fired," said he, his voice calm but urgent. "Now, Watson, we move." We descended the stairs with reckless speed, Holmes leading the way, his long legs taking the steps 2 at a time. We burst out the side door and crossed Baker Street, our footsteps echoing in the quiet. The alley was narrow, its walls slick with damp, and there, at its far end, stood Colonel Moran, his face, illuminated briefly by a match as he lit a cigarette, was hard and angular, his eyes cold as a snake's. He held the air gun, its barrel gleaming faintly, and as he saw us, his lips curled in a snarl. "Holmes," he spat, raising the weapon. I acted on instinct, lunging forward and tackling him to the ground. The air gun clattered against the cobblestones, and I pressed my revolver to his temple, my breath ragged. "Don't move," I growled, my voice steadier than I felt. Holmes was at my side in an instant, his own pistol drawn. "Well done, Watson," said he, his tone cool but approving. He knelt, binding Moran's wrists with a length of cord from his pocket. The colonel struggled, his strength formidable, but Holmes's knots were unyielding. "You think this ends it, Holmes?" Moran hissed, his voice thick with contempt. "You've only stirred the hornet's nest." Holmes's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, his focus on securing the prisoner. Within moments, the sound of boots announced the arrival of Inspector Lestrade and 2 constables, summoned by a prearranged signal from Holmes. The inspector's face was a mask of astonishment as he recognized my friend. "Mr. Holmes," he exclaimed, They said you were dead. A minor exaggeration, Holmes replied, his lips twitching. Take this man, Lestrade. He is wanted for attempted murder, and I suspect much more. As Moran was led away, his eyes burned with a hatred that promised further trouble. I watched him go, my heart still racing, and turned to Holmes. Is it over? I asked. He shook his head, his expression grave. Not yet, Watson. Moran is but one thread in a larger web. We have struck a blow, but there is more to unravel. We returned to 2-1B, where Mrs. Hudson, pale but resolute, awaited us. The wax bust, pierced by a single bullet, stood as a silent testament to our success. Holmes examined it, his fingers tracing the hole with clinical precision. A remarkable weapon, he murmured. Moran's ingenuity is undeniable. We must search his lodgings at once. I nodded, exhaustion creeping over me but overshadowed by the fire of purpose. Holmes was alive, and together we had faced a deadly foe and prevailed. Yet his words echoed in my mind, a larger web, a deeper mystery. As we prepared to leave for Conduit Street, I knew that our adventure was far from over, and the empty house, though no longer a place of immediate danger, held secrets yet to be revealed. Chapter 4. The trap is sprung. The night air was sharp as we emerged from the derelict house on Baker Street, the fog curling like a living thing around the gas lamps. My heart still pounded from our encounter in the alley, where Colonel Sebastian, Moran Moriarty's ruthless lieutenant, had been taken into custody. The image of his cold, venomous eyes lingered in my mind, a stark reminder of the danger we had faced. Sherlock Holmes, his silhouette sharp in the dim light, moved with a purposeful stride, his Inverness cape billowing as we crossed to 2-1B Baker Street. The trap had been sprung, and yet his expression taut, unsmiling told me the game was far from over. Inside our old lodgings, Mrs. Hudson greeted us with a mixture of relief and reproach. "Mr. Holmes," she exclaimed, her hands fluttering to her apron. "To think you'd let me believe you've gone these 3 years, and now this business with guns and ruffians." Her voice trembled, but her eyes shone with a fierce loyalty that warmed my heart. "Forgive me, Mrs. Hudson," said Holmes, his tone softer than usual. "Your discretion was vital, and you played your part admirably with the bust." He gestured to the wax figure in the window, its head now marred by a neat hole where Moran's bullet had struck. "A fine shot, as expected," he murmured. Examining the damage with clinical interest, I sank into a chair, my limbs heavy with the aftermath of our vigil. The revolver in my pocket felt like an anchor, grounding me in the reality of what had transpired. "Holmes," I said, "Moran is in Lestrade's hands. Surely that ends the threat." Holmes shook his head, his eyes narrowing as he paced before. "The fire, Moran is a cog, Watson, not the machine. His capture is a victory, but it exposes a larger design. He was not acting alone. His resources, his confidence, suggests a network still active, one that carries Moriarty's legacy." I frowned, the weight of his words settling over me. But who could command such a network now? "Moriarty is dead, you saw him fall." "Indeed," said Holmes, pausing to light his pipe, the flame casting sharp shadows across his angular face. "But men like Moran do not serve a memory. There is a mind at work, Watson, one I have yet to identify. We must search Moran's lodgings in Conduit Street at once. There will be evidence letters, ciphers, perhaps a name that will lead us to the heart of this conspiracy." I nodded, though exhaustion tugged at me. The thrill of the chase, so long absent, surged anew, and I rose, ready to follow. "When do we go?" I asked. "Now," said Holmes, his voice crisp. "Lestrade will meet us there with a warrant. Time is our enemy. Watson Moran's allies may already know of his capture. We left 2-1B under the cover of night, the fog thicker now, muffling the clatter of hooves and the distant cries of the city. A hansom took us to Conduit Street, where Moran's lodgings stood in a respectable but unassuming building, its windows dark. Lestrade awaited us, his lantern casting a feeble glow. "Holmes," he said, his voice gruff but tinged with respect. "You've a knack for turning up alive and making my night difficult. The place is secured, my men are watching the doors." "Well done, Lestrade," said Holmes, his eyes scanning the building. "Let us see what secrets the colonel keeps." We entered through a side door, the lock yielding to Holmes's deft touch. The interior was Spartan, a stark contrast to the opulence one might expect from a man of Moran's reputation. The rooms were furnished with little more than a bed, a desk, and a few hunting trophies, grim relics of his days in India, including a tiger's head with glass eyes that seemed to watch us. The air carried the faint scent of tobacco and gun. Oil, a fitting signature for a man of Moran's ilk. Holmes moved with purpose, his gaze darting from floor to ceiling. "Search everything, Watson," he instructed. "Moran is meticulous. He will have hidden his most valuable secrets." I set to work, checking drawers and shelves, while Holmes examined the desk with the intensity of a surgeon. Its lock resisted my efforts, but Holmes produced a small tool and, with a twist, opened it to reveal a trove of papers. Among them were maps of London, marked with cryptic symbols, and a series of letters written in a code I could not decipher. Holmes's eyes gleamed as he scanned them, his fingers tracing the lines with practiced ease. "Here," he said, holding up a single sheet. "A list of namesmen of influence, some known to me, others obscure. These are targets, Watson, or perhaps allies." And this, he unfolded another paper, his brow furrowing, a reference to a meeting at the Diogenes Club tomorrow night. I started, the name conjuring an image of Mycroft Holmes, that enigmatic figure whose intellect rivaled his brother's. The Diogenes Club. Could Mycroft be involved? Holmes's lips thinned. Mycroft knows more than he admits, but involvement? No, he is too cautious, too embedded in the machinery of government. Yet his club is a nexus of information. If Moran's allies meet there, it is no coincidence. Lestrade, hovering nearby, looked skeptical. The Diogenes, that place is a tomb for talkers. No one speaks a word there. Precisely, said Holmes, which makes it ideal for clandestine exchanges. We must be there, Watson, unseen and unheard. As we continued our search, I found a small notebook tucked beneath a floorboard, its pages filled with numbers and abbreviations. I handed it to Holmes, who studied it intently. A ledger, he murmured. Payments, perhaps, or instructions. This will take time to decode, but it confirms my suspicion Moran was a soldier in a larger army. We left Conduit Street as dawn approached, the fog giving way to a grey drizzle. Lestrade took the papers into evidence, promising to guard them closely, while Holmes and I returned to Baker Street. The weight of our discovery pressed upon me, and I saw in Holmes's face a grim determination. The trap had been sprung, and Moran was ours, but the shadow of Moriarty's legacy loomed larger than ever. As we sat by the fire in 2-1B, Holmes lit another pipe, his eyes distant. Tomorrow, Watson, said he, we venture into the lion's den. The Diogenes Club holds the next piece of this puzzle. Rest now, for we shall need our wits about us." I nodded, my mind racing with images of coded letters, hidden meetings, and the cold stare of Colonel Moran. The trap had closed, but the hunt was far from over, and I knew, as I watched Holmes's silhouette against the firelight, that we were on the cusp of a deeper mystery, one that would test us as never before. Chapter 5. The Colonel's Lair. The grey light of dawn seeped through the curtains of 2-1B. Baker Street, as Sherlock Holmes and I prepared to depart. The weight of our recent triumph over Colonel Sebastian Moran, tempered by the knowledge that our work was far from complete. The fire in the grate had dwindled to embers, and the air held a chill that matched the unease in my heart. Moran, now in the hands of Inspector Lestrade, had been a formidable foe, but Holmes's discovery of coded papers and a cryptic reference to a meeting at the Diogenes Club suggested a deeper conspiracy, one that stretched beyond the Colonel's malice. My revolver, cleaned and reloaded, rested in my pocket, a silent companion for the task ahead. Holmes, his eyes bright with that relentless energy that drove him, led the way to Conduit Street, where Moran's lodgings awaited further scrutiny. The journey was swift, the streets of London waking slowly under a drizzle that turned the cobblestones slick. Holmes was silent, his lean frame taut with purpose, and I sensed the workings of his mind, piecing together the fragments of evidence we had uncovered. As our hansom drew up to the unassuming building in Conduit Street, I noted its quiet respectability of facade that belied the darkness within. Lestrade's men stood guard, their faces grim under their helmets, and the inspector himself greeted us at the door, his lantern casting long shadows. "You're early, Holmes," said Lestrade, his voice gruff but laced with a grudging respect. "We've kept the place secure, as you asked. Found anything else since last night?" "Not yet," replied Holmes, his gaze sweeping the entrance. "But the Colonel's lair will yield its secrets. Watson, come." We ascended the narrow staircase to Moran's rooms. The air within as oppressive as before, heavy with the scent of tobacco and the faint metallic temps of gun oil. The sparse furnishings, a bed, a desk, a few hunting trophies, seemed unchanged. Yet Holmes moved with the precision of a hound on the scent, his eyes darting from floor to ceiling. I followed, my own senses heightened, searching for anything we might have missed in our haste the previous night. Holmes knelt by the desk, its lock still open from our earlier intrusion, and began a meticulous examination of its contents. The papers we had found, maps, coded letters. A list of names had been taken by Lestrade for safekeeping, but Holmes was undeterred. Moran was cautious, he murmured, his fingers probing the desk's underside. He would not keep all his secrets in plain sight. I turned my attention to the walls, running my hands along the panels for hidden compartments. The tiger's head on the wall, its glass eyes glinting, seemed to mock our efforts, and I suppressed a shudder at the thought of Moran's past as a hunter of both beast and man. My search yielded nothing but dust, and I glanced at Holmes, who had now moved to the floorboards, tapping each with a small mallet he produced from his pocket. A hollow thud broke the silence, and Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Here, Watson," said he, prying up a board with his jemmy. Beneath lay a shallow cavity, and within it a small, leather-bound case, its surface worn but intact. Holmes opened it with care, revealing a collection of items that sent a chill through me. A vial of clear liquid, a syringe, a bundle of banknotes, and a single photograph of a man I did not recognize, his face stern and aristocratic. Holmes held the photograph to the light, his brow furrowing. "The Honorable Ronald Adair," he said softly. "Murdered 3 weeks ago in a locked room, his death unsolved. This is no coincidence, Watson." I recalled the case, much discussed. In the papers, a young nobleman shot dead in his Park Lane home, the door locked, the windows secured. "You think Moran killed him?" I asked. "I am certain of it," said Holmes, slipping the photograph into his pocket. Adair's death was no random act. He was connected to Moran, perhaps an ally turned traitor. The vial suggests poison, a contingency Moran may have kept for himself or another. "We must investigate further." He replaced the floorboard and rose, his movements swift. "The banknotes are Forensics, I believe," he continued, examining them briefly. "Moran was funded, Watson, and not by small players. The meeting at the Diogenes Club is our next lead. If Adair was part of this network, his death may have been a warning to others." We searched the room for another hour, finding little else of note, a few cartridges for the air gun, a map of the continent marked with obscure routes, and a single cryptic note, D. Club, 9th, 11 p.m. Holmes pocketed the note, his expression unreadable. "The 9th is tomorrow," he said. "We have little time." As we left Conduit Street, the drizzle had turned to a steady rain, and the city seemed to close in around us, its greyness a mirror to the mystery we pursued. Lestrade promised to keep Moran under close guard, and Holmes instructed him to send the coded papers to an expert for analysis. But discreetly, Lestrade, Holmes added, "We are not yet clear of danger." Back at 221B, Holmes spread the photograph and note on the table, his pipe sending curls of smoke into the air. I watched him, marveling at the intensity of his focus, the way his mind wove connections where I saw only fragments. "Adair's murder," he said at last, "is the key. If Moran killed him, it was to silence him. Adair knew something, perhaps the identity of the one who now pulls the strings." I nodded, my thoughts racing. But why the Diogenes Club? It's Mycroft's domain. Could he know more than he's let on? Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Mycroft knows everything, Watson, or thinks he does. But he is no traitor. His silence is strategic, not complicit. Still, we must tread carefully. The Diogenes is a place of secrets, and tomorrow night we shall uncover one." He rose, his energy undimmed despite the hour. "Rest now, Watson," said he. "Tomorrow we enter a different kind of lair, one of silence and shadows. Bring your revolver and your courage. We shall need both." I retired to my room, the weight of the day settling over me. The Colonel's lair had yielded its secrets, but each answer brought new questions. As I lay in bed, the rain pattering against the window, I thought of Ronald Adair, of the photograph's stern face, and of the unseen hand that guided Moran's actions. Holmes was alive, and we were on the hunt, but the path ahead was dark, and I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that the Diogenes Club would test us as never before. Chapter 6. The Diogenes Club. The rain had ceased by the evening of the 9th, leaving London wrapped in a damp chill that seeped through my overcoat as Sherlock Holmes and I made our way to Pall Mall. The city was alive with the clatter of hooves and the low hum of voices, yet my thoughts were fixed on the silent sanctuary we approached. The Diogenes Club, that peculiar institution where speech was forbidden and secrets thrived in the quiet. The cryptic note from Colonel Moran's lodgings, with its mention of a meeting at this very place, had set Holmes's mind ablaze, and I could feel the tension radiating from him as we walked, his lean figure cutting through the fog like a blade. Holmes had been silent during our journey, his eyes darting to every shadow, every passerby, as if expecting Moran's unseen allies to emerge at any moment. My revolver, a familiar weight in my pocket, offered scant comfort against the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The Diogenes Club, presided over by Holmes's enigmatic brother, Mycroft, was no ordinary venue. It was a fortress of solitude, where men of influence retreated from the world's clamor, and the idea of it as a stage for conspiracy seemed both absurd and chillingly plausible. We reached the club's imposing facade, its windows dark save for a faint glow from within. Holmes paused at the entrance, his hand on the door. "Watson," he whispered, his voice low but urgent, "we must be invisible. Speak not a word once inside, and follow my lead. The rules of the Diogenes are sacrosanct, but we are not here." As members, I nodded, my pulse quickening. Holmes pushed open the door, and we stepped into a world of hushed opulence. The hall was lined with rich oak panels, the air heavy with the scent of old leather and cigar smoke. A porter, his face impassive, glanced at us but made no move to challenge our entry. For Holmes had arranged our access through Mycroft's influenza fact he had shared with reluctance, hinting at a strained exchange with his brother. We ascended. A broad staircase, our footsteps muffled by thick carpets, and entered a dimly lit corridor. Holmes led me to a small alcove, concealed by a heavy curtain, which overlooked the main reading room. From this vantage, we could see without being seen, the curtain's folds shielding us from prying eyes. The room below was a study in silence, its occupants men of grave demeanor, buried in newspapers or books seated in her backed chairs, their faces lit by the soft glow of reading lamps. The only sounds were the rustle of pages and the occasional creak of a chair. Holmes's eyes scanned the room, his body taut as a bowstring. "There," he murmured, so softly I strained to hear. He pointed to a corner where two men sat, their heads bent close, their hands moving in subtle gestures that suggested an exchange beyond mere reading. One was elderly, his white hair gleaming under the lamp, his posture rigid with authority. The other was younger, his features sharp and nervous, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting pursuit. "Sir Edward Greystone," Holmes whispered, indicating the older man. "A diplomat with ties to the Foreign Office. The other is unknown to me, but his manner suggests fear or guilt." I watched, my breath shallow, as the younger man slipped a folded paper to Sir Edward, who tucked it into his coat with practiced ease. The exchange was swift, unnoticed by the room's other occupants, but to Holmes it was as clear as a shout. "A cipher, Watson," he said, "the same hand as Moran's notes. We must follow them." The two men rose, moving toward a side door that led, I presumed, to a private chamber. Holmes motioned for me to follow, and we slipped from the alcove, keeping to the shadows. The corridor beyond was narrow, lined with portraits of stern-faced men, and we moved with care, our steps silent on the polished floor. Holmes's hand rested lightly on my arm, guiding me to a door left ajar, through which we glimpsed Sir Edward and his companion seated at a small table. Holmes produced a slender instrumental listening device of his own design, a metal tube. With a flared end pressed it to the door. He listened intently, his face a mask of concentration, then passed the device to me. Through it, I caught fragments of their conversation, their voices low but distinct. Adair was a mistake, the younger man said, his tone edged with panic. He was too reckless, demanding more than we agreed. Sir Edward's voice was cold, measured, His death served its purpose. The others are cowed now. But Holmes's return complicates matters. I glanced at Holmes, whose eyes gleamed with a fierce light. The mention of Ronald Adair confirmed his suspicions, and the reference to himself was a spark to his resolve. The younger man continued, his voice dropping. "The meeting tomorrow, will it proceed?" "It must," said Sir Edward. "The funds are secured, and the plan is in motion. Holmes cannot stop it, not now." Holmes withdrew the device, his expression grim. "Enough," he whispered. "We have what we need. To linger risks exposure." We retreated down the corridor, my heart pounding with the weight of what we had heard. The Diogenes Club, a place of silence, had spoken volumes, and the name of Ronald Adair, coupled with talk of a larger plan, confirmed that Moran's capture was but a step in a greater battle. As we reached the street, Holmes's pace quickened, his mind already racing ahead. "We must see Mycroft," he said, his voice clipped. "He may not be involved, but he knows more than he has shared. His reticence ends tonight." We hailed a hansom and made for Mycroft's rooms in Pall Mall, a short distance away. The elder Holmes greeted us with his usual air of detached omniscience. His vast bulk settled in an armchair, a glass of port in hand. "Sherlock," he said, his voice a low rumble, "you've been stirring shadows again." Holmes wasted no time. "Sir Edward Greystone, Mycroft. He meets in your club, passing. Ciphers and plotting in your shadow. What do you know of it?" Mycroft's eyes narrowed, but his tone remained even. "I know many things, brother, but I do not meddle in every affair. Greystone is a man of influence, yes, and his presence in the Diogenes is not unusual. As for his activities, I have suspected irregularities, but proof is another matter." Holmes's voice was sharp. "Proof, Mycroft. A man is dead. Ronald Adair, another Moran, sought my life. You suspected, yet did nothing." Mycroft sighed, a rare crack in his composure. "I hoped your return would flush out the rot. Sherlock, the Diogenes is a conduit for information, not a battlefield. I could not act without evidence, lest I disrupt more than I intended." Holmes's eyes blazed, but he held his temper. "Then know this, a meeting is planned tomorrow, and it concerns a plot that reaches beyond Moran. I will uncover it, with or without your aid." Cappy leaned back, his gaze steady. "You have my aid, Sherlock, such as it is, but tread carefully. Men like Greystone do not act alone." We left Mycroft's rooms, the night now deep and cold. Holmes was silent, his mind a whirl of calculations. And I felt the weight of our discovery, a conspiracy that touched the highest echelons, with Adair's murder at its heart. The Diogenes Club had revealed a glimpse of the enemy, but the full picture remained shrouded, and as we returned to Baker Street, I knew the morrow would bring us closer to the truth or to greater peril. Chapter 7. The Hidden Hand. The fire in 221B Baker Street burned low, casting flickering shadows across the familiar clutter of Holmes's rooms as we returned from our clandestine visit to the Diogenes Club. The hour was late, the city beyond, our windows cloaked in a silence broken only by the occasional clatter of a distant hansom. My mind was a tumult of what we had overheard: Sir Edward Greystone's cryptic exchange, the mention of Ronald Adair's murder, and the hint of a larger plan set to unfold at a meeting on the morrow. Sherlock Holmes, his lean frame taut with purpose, stood by the mantel, his pipe unlit, his eyes fixed on some unseen point, as if the very walls might yield answers to the puzzle before us. My revolver, still a reassuring weight in my pocket, seemed a frail defense against the shadowy forces we now faced. Holmes turned abruptly, his voice cutting through the stillness. "Watson, we are no longer hunting a single man. Moran was but the blade. Another hand wields it. The Diogenes Club has confirmed it a conspiracy rooted deep, with threads that reach into the very heart of London's power." I settled into a chair, my limbs heavy from the night's exertions, but my mind alert. "Sir Edward Greystone," I said. "He spoke of Adair's death as a necessity, a warning. But who is he answering to, and what is this meeting they plan?" Holmes's eyes gleamed, a spark of the old fire. "That, Watson, is what we must uncover. Greystone is a diplomat, a man of influence, but he is not the architect. His words betrayed deference, a fear of someone higher. The ledger from Moran's lair, the coded letters, the photograph of Adarel point to a network still active, one that Moriarty's death did not dismantle." He crossed to the table, where the few items we had retained from Conduit Street lay spread out. The photograph of Ronald Adair, the cryptic note about the Diogenes meeting, and the small notebook filled with numbers and abbreviations. Holmes picked up the notebook, his fingers tracing the entries. "This is no mere ledger," he said. "It is a record of transactions, payments, perhaps, or instructions. The code is complex, but not unbreakable. I shall need time, but for now, Adair's murder is our clearest thread." I recalled the details of the case, much discussed in the papers. Ronald Adair, a young nobleman of wealth and charm, had been found dead in his Park Lane home, a bullet through his head, the room locked from within. No weapon was found, no intruder detected, and the police had been baffled. "You believe Moran killed him," I said. "But how?" The room was sealed. Holmes's lips curved in a faint, grim smile. "The how is simpler than the why, Watson. Moran's airgun, a weapon of his own design, is silent and precise. A shot through a window, even a small crack, could have done the deed, leaving no trace but the bullet itself. The why, however, is what drives this game. Adair was no innocent bystander, he was part of their circle, perhaps a traitor or a liability. He paced the room, his movements sharp and restless. "We must visit the Adair residence at once. The scene of the crime will hold clues the police overlooked, and time is short. The meeting tomorrow night, whatever it entails, must not proceed unchallenged." Though the hour was late, I felt the familiar surge of purpose that Holmes's presence always kindled. "Shall I send for a hansom?" I asked. Holmes nodded. "Do so, but discreetly. We are watched, Watson, though by whom I cannot yet say. Bring your revolver, and keep your eyes sharp." Within the hour, we were rattling through the dark streets toward Park Lane, the fog parting before our hansom like a curtain. The Adair residence was a grand affair, its facade of white stone gleaming faintly under the gas lamps. A butler, his face pale and drawn, admitted us after Holmes presented a card claiming urgent business on behalf of the Home Officer ruse. I knew but one delivered with such authority that the man did not question it. We were shown to the drawing room where Lady Adair, Ronald's mother, awaited us. She was a woman of middle years, her face etched with grief, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute. "Mr. Holmes," she said, recognizing him at once, "I had heard you were gone, yet here you are, and I pray you bring answers about my son." Holmes bowed, his manner gentle but firm. "I am very much alive, Lady Adair, and I am here to seek the truth." May we see the room where your son met his end. She led us upstairs to a study on the second floor, its door still sealed with a lock that had baffled Scotland Yard. The room was richly furnished, with a mahogany desk, shelves of books, and a single window overlooking a small garden. The air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and faded flowers, a memorial to the life cut short. Lady Adair recounted the night of the murder. Ronald had been alone, working late, when a shot was heard. The door was locked from the inside, the key still in place, and the window, though slightly ajar, showed no signs of tampering. Holmes moved with the precision of a bloodhound, his eyes scanning every detail. He knelt by the window, his magnifying glass glinting as he examined the sill. Here, he said, his voice low but triumphant. A faint scratch, as from a tripod or a similar device. Moran's airgun Watson was fired from outside, likely from the garden below. I peered out the window, noting the narrow strip of grass bordered by shrubs. But the angle, I said. It would require a marksman of extraordinary skill. Moran is precisely that, said Holmes, rising. A hunter who never misses. The bullet entered at an upward angle, striking Adair as he sat at his desk. The window was closed after the shot, leaving the room locked and the mystery intact. Lady Adair, listening, clutched a handkerchief to her lips. But why, Mr. Holmes? Ronald was a good man, a card player, yes, but no enemy to anyone. Holmes's gaze softened, but his voice remained steady. Your son, Lady Adair, was entangled with dangerous men. I believe he sought to break free, and they silenced him. Tell me, did he keep papers, letters, anything that might hint at his associates? She hesitated, then led us to a small safe hidden behind a painting. He kept his private papers here, she said, unlocking it with a key from her pocket. Inside were letters, bills, and a single notebook, its pages filled with cryptic symbols similar to those in Moran's ledger. Holmes seized the notebook, his eyes alight. This, Watson, is the key. Adair was no mere victim. He was a player in their game, and his death was a message. We must decipher this before the meeting tomorrow. We left the Adair residence with the notebook, promising Lady Adair answers, though I saw in her eyes a grief that no truth could fully assuage. Back at 2-1B, Holmes set to work on the notebook, his pipe sending clouds of smoke as he pored over the symbols. I watched, my exhaustion forgotten, as his mind wrestled with the code. By dawn, he had cracked it, revealing a series of names, some familiar, others obscure, and a plan to destabilize certain financial institutions, with dates and locations that aligned with the Diogenes meeting. The hidden hand, Holmes said, his voice low and fierce. Not Moriarty, but one who seeks to inherit his mantle. Tomorrow, Watson, we end this. I nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. The hidden hand, guiding Moran, Adair, and now Greystone, was close to being unmasked. But the cost of that revelation would be high. As I prepared for the day, my revolver at my side, I knew we were on the brink of a reckoning that would test us as never before. Chapter 8. The final piece. The morning broke over London with a pall of grey clouds, the air heavy with the threat of rain as Sherlock Holmes and I sat in the familiar confines of 2-1B Baker Street. The fire crackled in the grate, casting a warm glow that did little to dispel the chill of anticipation that gripped me. The notebook from Ronald Adair's safe lay open on the table, its cryptic symbols now partially deciphered by Holmes's relentless intellect, revealing a web of names and plans that pointed to a conspiracy far-reaching and perilous. My revolver, cleaned and loaded, rested in my pocket, a silent companion for the task ahead. Tonight, at the Diogenes Club, we would confront the shadowy forces behind Colonel Sebastian Moran and Adair's murder, and I felt the weight of the moment as keenly as any in our long partnership. Holmes stood by the window, his pipe unlit, his eyes scanning the street below with a vigilance that betrayed his calm exterior. "Watson," said he, turning to me, "the game nears its end. The meeting at the Diogenes Club tonight is the fulcrum upon which this conspiracy turns. Sir Edward Greystone and his unknown companion are but pawns, but they will lead us to the king." I nodded, my thoughts racing over the revelations of the past days. The photograph of Adair, the coded ledger from Moran's lair, the overheard conversation at the Diogenes all pointed to a hidden hand, a successor to Moriarty's criminal empire. "And Adair's murder?" I asked. "You're certain it was Moran's work?" "Beyond doubt," said Holmes, his voice crisp. "The scratch on the windowsill, the angle of the bullet, the airgun's silent precision, it was Moran's handiwork. But the why, Watson, is what completes the puzzle. Adair's notebook suggests he was no mere victim. He was a player in their scheme, perhaps seeking to break free or to profit beyond his share. His death was a warning to others, and tonight we shall learn who issued it." He crossed to the table, picking up the notebook and flipping through its pages. The code is a variant of a Vigenère cipher, complex but not unbreakable. It names Greystone, several minor officials, and a figure referred to only as the broker. This broker, I believe, is the architect we seek, the one who funds and directs the remnants of Moriarty's network. I frowned, the name stirring a vague unease. "The broker," I repeated. "No clue to their identity?" "Not yet," said Holmes, his eyes narrowing. "But the meeting tonight will reveal them. The ledger mentions a transfer of funds Sweeth banknotes, like those we found in Moran's lair. The broker will be there, or their agent will, to finalize the plan." The plan, as Holmes had deciphered, involved manipulating certain financial institutions, destabilizing markets to profit a select few. It was a scheme of audacious scope, worthy of Moriarty himself, and the thought of such a mind at large sent a chill through me. "What is our course?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tightening in my chest. Holmes's lips curved in a grim smile. "We return to the Diogenes Club, Watson, but not as observers. We shall infiltrate the meeting itself, disguised and unnoticed. Mycroft has secured us entry as temporary members, a favor he granted with his usual reluctance. Your role is to watch, listen, and be ready. The broker, or their proxy, will be there, and we must identify them without raising alarm." The day passed in a blur of preparation. Holmes donned a disguiser, grey-haired scholar with stooped shoulders and thick spectacles, his face altered by subtle makeup that rendered him unrecognizable. I, too, was transformed, my mustache trimmed and my hair darkened, posing as a retired colonel with a penchant for rare books. Our credentials, forged with Mycroft's aid, were impeccable, and by evening we were ready. The Diogenes Club loomed before us as we arrived, its silent grandeur as forbidding as ever. The porter admitted us without question, and we entered the main reading room, where the air was thick with the scent of leather and silence. Holmes's eyes scanned the room, noting the same faces we had seen before, including Sir Edward Greystone, who sat alone, his expression tense. The younger man from our previous visit was absent, but a new figure caught Holmes's attention, a woman, tall and severe, her dark hair pinned tightly, her eyes sharp as she glanced at Greystone. "Mrs. Eleanor Vance," Holmes whispered, his voice barely audible. "A financier's widow, known for her discretion and her wealth. She is not a member, yet here she is, curious." We took seats in a corner, our faces buried in newspapers, but our attention fixed on Greystone and Mrs. Vance. As the clock struck 11, Greystone rose and moved to a side door, followed by Mrs. Vance and two others, portly man with a florid face and a thin, nervous fellow in clerical attire. Holmes signaled me to follow, and we slipped through the crowd, our steps silent on the thick carpet. The side door led to a private chamber, its walls lined with bookshelves, a single table at its center. The four figures sat, their voices low, and Holmes, with the audacity that defined him, eased the door open just enough for us to listen. I stood guard, my hand on my revolver, as Holmes pressed his ear to the crack. "The funds are in place," Mrs. Vance said, her voice cold and precise. "The exchange will occur tomorrow at the Bank of England. Our agents are ready." Greystone nodded, his hands clasped tightly, and Holmes, "He's alive, and he's close." Moran's failure. Moran was expendable, Mrs. Vance interrupted, her tone cutting. "The broker has no patience for failure. Holmes will be dealt with, as Adair was." I glanced at Holmes, whose face was a mask of concentration. The mention of the broker confirmed his suspicions, but Mrs. Vance's authority suggested she was more than a mere agent. The portly man spoke next, his voice tremulous. "But the risk, Holmes, is relentless. If he suspects, he suspects." "Nothing," Mrs. Vance snapped. "The plan proceeds. The markets will falter, and we will profit. The broker's instructions are clear." Holmes withdrew, his eyes blazing with triumph. "The final piece, Watson," he whispered as we retreated to the corridor. "Mrs. Vance is the broker, or as close to them as we shall find tonight. We must act swiftly." We left the Diogenes Club, the night air sharp against my face. Holmes's. The plan was forming. I could see it in the set of his jaw, but he shared only fragments. "Tomorrow, Watson," he said as we hailed a hansom, "we strike at the Bank of England. The exchange must not happen. Gather your strength, we face a foe as cunning as Moriarty himself." Back at 2-1B, Holmes pored over Adair's notebook, cross-referencing it with Moran's ledger. The pieces fell into place. Dates, names, and a plan to manipulate stock prices through forged transactions. Mrs. Vance, whether the broker or their chief lieutenant, was the linchpin. As I prepared for bed, my heart heavy with the stakes, Holmes sat by the fire, his pipe now lit, his eyes distant but resolute. "The final piece," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Tomorrow, Watson, we end this game." I nodded, my revolver at my side, knowing that the morrow would bring a confrontation that would test our courage and resolve. The hidden hand was revealed, and with it, the full scope of the danger we faced. Yet with Holmes beside me, I felt ready for whatever lay ahead, as the fire burned low and the night closed in around us. The end.